Hi and welcome to this DCP Web HTML5 and CSS beginners tutorial. In today's tutorial we're going to look at CSS padding. So let's open up our web browser and we'll open up Notepad++ and we'll get our project open, the Sun project. We'll drag that into Google Chrome and then we'll drag that also into Notepad++ and we'll drag our CSS into here. Let's just set these screens to the side, and I want to show you padding, right? So to show you padding, let's do it on this, a good example will be on this first set of content here. This was called, in CSS we used the intro text for this first part, right? So here we can see the intro text class, and inside of this class, just to show you a bit more clearly, we're going to put a background here. We can call it a temporary one, we can leave it there, it doesn't really matter. It's just to show you. You can see these ones have got grey backgrounds, right? And you can see that we've got the grey background by using the background dash color equals grey. I'm only putting this background in here to show you the padding working. It will be a bit easier to see. So if we did background color and we set that to, let's set it to green, right? So it'll be easier to see. So we'll set the background color of this div tag to green. It's a bit easier to see the padding now. So if I do padding and I set it to 10 pixels, let's set it to something like 20, right? 20 pixels. So I've just typed in this new element called padding and I've given it 20 pixels, and it's going to be applied to this green section. When I refresh, you'll see these down the side, these 20 pixels, right? Gap. You see a larger gap at the top and a larger gap at the bottom. The reason why we see the larger gap at the top and the bottom is because the browser itself, as default, when it's dealing with paragraphs, it adds a margin at the top and bottom. So whenever you look at a newspaper or an article or some content, or if it's a written book or anything, when there's paragraphs, those paragraphs are always separated. So you can see that right here. There's a gap here, right? But if we look at our code, we didn't tell the browser to put a gap there. Even if I close this gap in between these paragraphs, so if I close it in between them, that gap will still be maintained. Because what the browser is doing is it's saying there's a paragraph open here and one closing here, and there's another one opening here and closing here. And as default, whenever there's a paragraph ending, I'm going to put a carriage return, like a line space. Yeah, as you would write content, you wouldn't write all of this content without any sort of gaps or paragraphs. It would be hard to read. So the browser as default adds this gap. You can control that, but as default it's going to do that inherently out the browser. So it doesn't matter which website you look, which browser you use, it's always going to have this paragraph gap. But what we wanted to do is put a border down the sides here. So we could do that on these bottom ones as well, but we use this top example and we use padding, right? Now let's just say we wanted to get rid of the gap, the paragraph gap. Let's just say we wanted to do that for some reason. What we could do is target the paragraph tag. So you look here, we're targeting the H1 tag. So we're targeting this H1 tag here, and we wrote a class for it, right? So we could target the paragraph tag. So we can do P to target the paragraph tag, and we could set the margin, because as default, all paragraphs contain a margin. We could set the margin to 0 pixels. And if we were to do that and refresh, you'd see that that gap will close down now at the bottom, and you can see in between the paragraphs the gap is missing now. So normally I would never do this. You know, it doesn't make sense because now it's really hard and everything's, you know, there's no gaps here at all. If I set this to 5 pixels, the margin, you'll see gaps will start to appear here and down here and in between this content. So let's refresh it. Now you can see the gap here, right? You can see there's a gap here, right here. And there's another one here in between the content. Let's set it to something a lot larger, like 50, and refresh. Then you can see there's a much bigger gap here and in between the content here. So we'll delete this paragraph. Maybe we'll look at that later, and we can look at how we can manage the paragraph tag a bit better. But the idea here was to sort out these margins to show you, or the padding inside the content, right? So on the outside, So think of padding on inside the div and margins will be on the outside. So if we did a margin here and set that to 20 pixels, then that would affect the outside of the content. Now you can see there's a gap here and at the bottom and one at the top. So margins on the outside, padding is on the inside of the div tag. So that should be quite clear now, yeah? So you can set these paddings, you can set them up just the same way that we did the margin around this image. We can set the padding around the content as well. And we do that clockwise. Remember, top, right, bottom, and left. So padding here, this is the top, 20 pixels. If we set that to 0 and refresh, we won't refresh. We'll set the top to 0. We'll set the right hand side to 20. The bottom will set to 0 pixels. And then the left hand side will set to 20 pixels. So we've got top, right, bottom, and left. Top, the right side, the bottom side, and the left side. And we refresh. Then we'll see something different, right? Now you can see that the margin or the padding at the top has been set to 0, and we've only got the ones on the left and right. So we can control the padding across the top, left, bottom, and right specifically, as we can control margins as well. Yeah, we can control those elements individually, you could say, just as we can control this margin. So this is the top margin, 20 pixels. The left one we could set to 20. So let's say top is 20. The left we could set to 20 pixels as well. So this is the right, sorry. And then the bottom one we could set to 40 pixels. And then the left one we could set to 20. So when we do that, we're managing the size, but the bottom gap will be bigger now. You can see it's increased here, but the other ones are maintained the same. So this is a good way to lay out. This is a good technique or a tool that we can use to lay out content specifically and how we want to set out our margins, especially like in these two blocks here. We could add margins down the side so that it doesn't sit right flush up to the div tag here, you can see, right? So let's just sort this top one out a little bit. Maybe we'll reduce this gap at the bottom. We'll set that to 20 and refresh, and then go and experiment. Just play around with these. So like this is the top padding. If we set that to 100, then we're going to get a much bigger gap at the top. And we may do that for certain reasons. I'm not saying this is exactly what we'll be doing, but we may want a gap at the top here because we may want a title up here somewhere or something sliding across, right? Some content that's out of the screen. Remember we were showing you the positioning of this element before. We may have some content that slides into the screen, or we can do all fancy stuff, right? We just need to understand that margins sit on the outside and then the padding sits on the inside of the div tag. That's how we can think of it, yeah? So let's set this back to something like 20, and we'll set the background to, let's just set it to grey for now. And we'll see the content like this. So that is a good understanding of padding, and I hope that makes sense. Padding on the inside of the div tag and margins will sit on the outside. That's how we manipulate the padding and the margin here. And we can do like specific padding and specific margins. Remember we did it down here. We put the left, top and bottom. We can do the same with the padding as well. We can specify the left, the top, the right and the bottom padding using that same controller. So we can do like padding, and then as I'm typing it in using Notepad++, it's saying bottom, left, top, right. It's giving me the option straight away, right? Here. So you can set specific ones here as well. We happen to be doing it using the single element and then defining them clockwise, top, right, bottom and left. Okay, that's the end of this tutorial. It's quite short and simple. Just wanted to show you padding, and we'll move on to the next tutorial. Okay, I look forward to seeing you in that next DCP web tutorial.